This is Meet the Author, and I'm your host, Tigner Rand. Meet the Author is a part of rolling out a book club series where I talk with authors about their new books, projects, and of course, what inspires them to write. Today, joining me is a phenomenal writer. I want to say new writer, but this is actually book number 2 for Elle. She was the instant New York Times and indie bestseller for her first book, which was Wings of Ebony, a YA novel about a Black teen who learned about her magic from her ancestors, all while trying to take care of her city community from drugs. But the follow-up is the new book we're talking about today, which is Ashes of Gold. And I am excited to bring to the table to meet the author today, the lovely Elle. How are you doing today, Jay?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yes. Before we get started, this is the book. It is the new book. It will be out soon. It is currently available at blackbookstore.com. This is a great read for any age. I know it's for YA, a young adult audience, but this is a good read for an adult also. I actually like it. And you have to read book number 1 to be able to understand book number 2. There's no way around it. So that's 2 books you need to pick up just to get the grasp of Ashes of Gold. Is that a fair assessment, Jay?
I think so. I mean, you could jump into book 2 first, but you might be a little confused.
Yeah, exactly. So what made you started out as a journalist writing school. So when did you get the writing bug to become an author?
You know, it's interesting. I don't think that when I started writing, becoming an author was where my head was at. I literally was just like, there's a story on my heart that I really could not stop thinking about, and I wanted to get it out. So it was really like the story, this story that I just felt like I needed to tell. And then when I finished it, or actually when I got about 25% in, I realized like, oh, wow. 1, I really like writing books. I don't know if I'm any good at it, but I like it. And 2, I want to try to get this out to kids who need to read it. Not just kids, but young adults, like you said, it's for anyone. And that's really where my desire to pursue becoming an author, I think, was truly born. Because, you know, growing up, I didn't see authors that look like me, writing in the YA fantasy space, especially. And so to be frank, it didn't occur to me that I could be an author. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it just—
No, that is accurate statement, because there were not many, but Octavia Brown was pretty much the premier writer in the fantasy sci-fi world. Who else was writing? As an example for you to see.
You know, and that's the power of representation, right? That's the power. Now, also, when I was a young reader, YA wasn't really a thing either. So I went from like reading middle grade books to like reading Eric Jerome Dickey. And so I jumped right into like adult, because there weren't books on shelves there weren't many books on shelves by authors that looked like me. And YA was such a undiscovered territory until like the burst of Twilight. I feel like we didn't get this YA surge. And when we got that YA surge, it was largely white. And so when I started to fall in love with books, which I've loved reading since I was very little, but when I started to feel like there was a story for me to tell, there was some dissonance between I have a story to tell and I can tell my story. And I credit a lot of that, my ability to do that in this industry, to people who have gone before me, like Angie Thomas and Nick Stone and Danielle Clayton, and all of these authors who have gone before me to open these doors to create a space for characters like Rue to exist. Because if I would have tried this 10 years ago, I don't think we would be having this conversation. I don't think my book would be a thing.
Very true. I agree with you. I do know personally several brothers who are YA authors, and that was 10 years ago, and they're having a hard time to get their books, which are great books, into the mainstream to be able to see them, because, and I guess, really come down to timing, as you say. Why do you think is that? Why do you think that? What do you think is that way, that it's so hard for Black authors or writers to be able to get their books in front of an audience?
You mean like a big traditional publishing audience?
Traditional publishing, or even if they decided to do their own self-publishing, because it's not easy to write a book,
No, it's not. And to be fair, I don't know a lot about the self-publishing arm. That wasn't an
Exactly.
I was able to explore because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to finance it myself. So I knew for me, it was going to be traditional publishing or nothing. But I think that the answer there is very layered, to be truthful. I think there are lots of things at play. I think that there is a misconception in publishing that only white readers buy books, or white readers make up most readers. And I think that misconception drives a lot of publishing decisions. Sometimes it certainly did a decade ago, and it bleeds through even now. Even though we're seeing more books by marginalized authors on shelves, there's still a long way to go. We still represent a very small percentage of books on shelves. It is very disproportionate with how many marginalized people there are in the world, or even in just, if we just talk about America. So there's a long way to go, but publishing approaches book publishing as a business first, which makes sense. I mean, it's a business. And so I think there's this disconnect between who reads and who buys books, which is completely errant, obviously. But there's a disconnect there. And I think that disconnect is rooted in a lack of diversity in the publishing world. Because when you have the decision makers at a table, the people signing checks, the people saying which books are going to be, which manuscripts are going to be turned into books, if the people around that table all look the same, share the same experiences, connect to the same types of characters, then there's sort of an unspoken consensus about what books are going to be profitable. If you don't have a representative at that table who's connecting to books from a variety of experiences, then that voice sometimes is shut out. A lot of times is shut out.
Very
so I
true.
think there's a lot of there's a lot of factors at play. And then I think access to resources is another big thing. Some of the work that I do is with teens. I like to work with aspiring writers who are just young kids who want to tell stories, who are excited about storytelling in its many forms. Be it telling a story through TikTok, or telling a story visually through pictures, or telling a story with writing, with spoken word, with rap, with poetry, just the art of storytelling. I like to work with those kids and connect with them on social media or do events at schools to pour into those kids and really nourish that love of creation, because a lot of times we think of writing a book as a luxury, because it is. You have the time and space to sit down for hours and craft a story. I mean, I recognize my own privilege in that. My partner was working full time. And so, yes, I had little kids at the time when I started writing, but I had the privilege of not having to worry about how I was going to pay my mortgage or my rent or my bills. I could take care of my kids, rely on my husband's job, and start writing. Not everybody has that privilege. So when you think about the time that people have, working mothers, people who are in intergenerational families, and they are trying to get a job as soon as they can to help support. And this is very much what my household was like. You get your first job as soon as you can, so you can start bringing some money in to help support. And that soaks up your time. And the thing about creation is it requires creative energy. It requires space.
Oh, yes.
And that's not something a lot of people, that's not a privilege a lot of people are afforded to have. So I think there are layers. And then of course you have I was a teacher by trade. And so education is sort of my soapbox, but you have schools that have creative writing programs. You have schools where the achievement gap is so large, the teachers do not have the time to spend teaching creative writing because they see it as like an optional elective when they have to focus on the state mandated standards that the kids have to pass at their end of the year tests. So there becomes sort of this difference in access to who gets to like spread their creative wings and who doesn't. And I think all of those things bleed into this issue ultimately. So anyway, for anyone out there interested in writing, just know that if you have questions, my DMs are always open. I'm very accessible.
That's awesome. Two quick points that you brought up, which are quite interesting. You said you work with a lot of students and, with writing. What are some of the things you tell them to, advice you offer to them as far as writing if one of them say, hey, I think I want to be an author too, what three things you may tell them that for advice?
So first, to be a writer, you need to be a reader. And I realize that sometimes their shoulders kind of sink a little bit like, oh, but I don't want to read stories. I just want to write the ones that I want to write. And I'll get to that because that's valid. But it's really important to understand that books and stories tend to follow a structure. And that's not to say you need to follow the structure perfectly, but you need to be aware of sort of the structure of a scene, the structure of a novel, the way a play has 3 acts, and the way a story progresses between like opening your eyes to who the character is, presenting this character with a dilemma, and then wrapping that up at the end. You need to have some general understanding of like how a story is paced. If you want to write thrillers, you need to be reading thrillers. Even if you don't love them, read that thriller and point out all the things you don't like and plan to do it better in your book. But like, know what's out there. If you plan to read fantasy, look at how the author creates the world. When do they tell you about the world? How do you learn about the world? Do they just tell you everything, or do they show you everything? Do you get to see the magic unfold, or do they explain it to you? Take notes mentally, or if you want to, because I'm a note taker, write it down and look at the way books are structured. Writers are readers. And I think it's really important for marginalized aspiring writers to understand. I realize what I'm saying is a lot of the books that you might be reading, you don't enjoy because you might not connect to them. You might not see yourself in those stories. There are more books out there, I think, coming to shelves from marginalized creators, and I'm hoping that that number grows. But there are quite a bit of resources out there. Read widely, really look into book communities and ask for book recommendations. Call up an indie bookstore that's Black owned and ask them, what book is flying off your shelf in the thriller space? I want to read it. And you'd be surprised at some of the recommendations that you might get, because not everything that you see on Amazon or that you see kind of, on a poster, like those are paid marketing things. There are a lot of good books out there that never get their roses, like they never get their moment in the sun. So ask for book recommendations, read. The second thing I would say is understand that to be a writer, literally all you have to do is write. That's literally it. You can just write. And so I think a lot of times, especially kids, teens particularly, can build up things in their heads like, oh, it's this big daunting thing. Just literally just grab a paper, a notebook, whatever, get on Wattpad and just start typing. Yeah. Because that is the definition of being a writer. Don't overthink it. You want to write, start writing, boom, you've done it. Call yourself a writer. It's really that simple. And it's also kind of like exciting, right? It gives you a sense of pride. It's like, because writing is a discipline and it takes a lot of stamina and creative energy. And to be committed to that is valuable. And it's something to be proud of. And then the third thing is get connected with writing, with fellow writers. So even if you're a teen, I have an email right now that I need to get to, but I'm like having out of the office hours this week. But I have an email in my inbox right now that's waiting for me to respond to by a teen who I met last year. He interviewed me for their school book club, and he told me he'd written a book, and his name is Alex Zhang, and he told me that he'd love me to read his book. And I said, I would love to. I'm slammed, but I would love to. Send me a copy. He sent me a copy, and he said, I told him, I said, follow up with me and I'm going to let you know what I think. And he said, okay. It has been a year. He has not forgotten. He has reached out and he has said, okay, Miss Elle, like, what did you think of my book? And I am so excited to write back to him because I'm proud that he was persistent and that he's proactively trying to get connected. Authors are real people. Like, I know you see them on social media and think they're like these bigger than life people. We're extremely normal, I promise you, at least most of us. So
you're right. You're absolutely correct. Yeah.
So just reach out, get connected, talk to other people who are interested in writing stories. Wattpad is a huge community over there where a lot of writers get started. Go on to Twitter, which, Twitter is not my favorite place, but there's a huge writing community on Twitter. You can just search the hashtag writing community and you will find hundreds of thousands of people just writing stories every day. Connect with them, swap pages, read theirs, let them read yours, get feedback, engage with other people. It's like putting an exercise plan into motion. You're probably going to stick to it a little better if you have a friend to hold you accountable. So get connected and find that community.
That's awesome. That was good. That's good. I'm really glad that the young man actually sent the book to you.
Thank you.
That took a lot of courage just to be able to send that, and then to follow up. How many?
A lot of people don't, because they don't want to be a bother, and I get that. But The entire reason I'm doing any of this is so that kids believe that they, like, the next generation after me believes that they can do what felt impossible to them. So it's like when I say reach out, I literally mean reach out.
That's awesome. I like that. And most authors, a lot of people don't do that, but and I hear the sincerity when you say that. You know, and that means a lot to a person who's really trying to find something, especially in the writing world. So tell me about the book. Tell me the backstory of the title. How did you come up with Ashes of Gold for your new novel?
So Ashes of Gold, you know, it was interesting. I wrote this book in the middle of 2020. So I think we all remember what the middle of 2020 was like. I was emotionally empty. I was exhausted physically and mentally, but I knew that I was writing the second iteration of this story. And Wings of Ebony, if you haven't read it, is this story about this powerful, I mean, she doesn't realize she's powerful, but she's coming to realize she's powerful. This powerful Black girl from an inner city community that is sort of seen a certain way. And she's not okay with the way that her community is seen. And she decides to change that. Through that process, she has to learn about her magic that her ancestors left her and really grapple with who she is and step into that person. So going into book 2, with very little emotional energy left and wanting to do her story justice, I thought about, you know, what is the core of the story? What is, because this is the final iteration in this 2-book duology. This is the final one in the series. So I was asking myself, at its core, what is the message that I want to leave with readers? And ultimately, Ashes of Gold is about worthiness. It's for anyone has struggled to or needs to hear that they are worthy of all kinds of things. I mean, there's a big emphasis on love in my series, the love of community, the love of family, the love of your siblings, the love of found family, the love of yourself is a big focus in Ashes of Gold. And I found that that was rooted, like that discovery process of worthiness is rooted in understanding where you come from. And so Ashes reminds me of ancestors and like things that are dead. There's also some symbology there to like a phoenix, because a phoenix, to be reborn, has to burn itself, has to end up in a heap of ashes, but it rises from ashes. So ashes to me symbolized that. And then when I thought of gold, I wanted something that just encapsulated majesty, the epitome of worthiness, the richest of riches. And I don't mean currency, I mean like your worth that is priceless. And so Ashes of Gold, and a story that sort of, and I won't spoil it, of course, but a story that deals with Rue's ancestors, because that's a big thread in the second book. Ashes of Gold just felt right. It felt right.
Yeah, and self-worth was one of the, I get that was truly the thread that was the undertone throughout the book. And a lot of times, you know, and I guess we're all guilty at some point in our life, but Rue was that one that no matter how great she was, she always found doubt in herself.
Relatable, right? I feel like that's so
in which I couldn't be angry with her, but at the same time, because I'm the reader, I know, but he's like, okay, Rue, you better than that, you know. But then of course you had Julius, her friend, was trying to encourage her, you know. I think of one phrase he said, you know, if you're going to support anyone, support yourself first. You know, she's always worried about who's on her team. You know, so your characters, character development. How do you? Do you have any? Are there anything in here relatable to you, or do you have any sources that you pull from for ideas for, you know, developing your characters?
You know, there's a lot. When I think of Rue is, part of her is me, you know, her stubbornness. I've been known to be, as my she will attest such. But then her heart, you know, Rue is every Black girl, every Black kid in an inner city community who felt like they had to prove themselves, who felt like who they were was determined before they got an opportunity to define that themselves. And so I think I take inspiration from my life growing up in an inner city community. East Row, the neighborhood that Rue is from, was modeled after my home of Third Ward, which is where I grew up.
Oh yeah, the Third Ward, yeah.
Yeah, and I took a lot of inspiration from the magic in my own community. I love it when I get a question where people are like, how did you come up with magic? Like to put magic in an inner city community? I was like, oh, it's already there. I just wrote a story about it, right? Like, so I took a lot of inspiration from my own, like Miss Leola is named after my mother's mother, and she has the personality of my dad's mother. So I blended
Interesting. Okay, you
grandmas together. Yes, and in the exclusive edition of Wings of Ebony, there are recipes from my grandma in the back. And I had to fight for those recipes because these are recipes like her lemon pound cake recipe. No one in the family has been allowed to know. So I had to fight for her to allow me to release it to the public in this book.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, because in Wings of Ebony, you actually kind of give, I guess you would say, almost like the prelude, the letters that her father wrote. And then also because Miss Leola wrote, she loved to cook. She loved to feed the community. And so you did mention about the cake, but what made you decide to do that? Why did you decide to add the recipes and just kind of, it made it more personable, to be honest with you?
Well, so first of all, what pulls me into a story is a character. Like I love cool magic and a cool plot that's really twisty and surprising. But at the end of the day, I have to love the character to want to finish the book. And so when I set out to tell the story, I wanted to bring Rue alive on the page, but I also wanted to bring East Row alive on the page. And East Row is encompassed in Miss Leola, the kids that she feeds and loves on. It's encompassed in Julius. It's encompassed in Tasha and what her life is like. It encompasses all these things. And so I wanted the authenticity of my home to bleed onto the page. So when I think about, so when I wrote Wings of Ebony, I wasn't living in Texas. My partner at the time was in the military. So I was away from home. I left at 17 and I missed it so much. And so one way for me to bring home alive, like in my own home with my own kids, is to make some of the recipes that my grandma would make. And so I thought, how cool would it be when Barnes & Noble reached out and they were like, we want to do an exclusive edition because you're our book of the month for Black History Month. I thought cool. They were like, what exclusive content can you give us? And I was like, you know what? Let's dial up the authenticity meter a little bit and let's put grandma's recipes in there if I can convince her. And she conceded. But in the letters that SM wrote and like the sketches that he did, because I figured so many people would be curious to see what Rue's mother looked like. So I thought that was fun to have. And I just wanted the beauty and the richness in our community to shine on the page. So like there's so much we could say. We could have a whole nother interview on the way I think Black men are treated in media and literature. So it was very important to me with the Sim, Rue's father, to show a different version of what people so often see and show. I wanted to show a true, accurate version of how incredibly loving and powerful and thoughtful and sacrificing her father was. And so that picture, that sketch of him holding baby Rue is just the sweetest.
It was, it really kind of made it full circle. You could see as much as he was trying to, and show how much he loved her, but he never want to force it upon Rue.
Yeah,
but
well,
the letters
responds well to things being forced upon her.
Yeah.
And he was under a unique type of pressure in Gazan, working with the chancellor, knowing that his people were living in secret. Like he was living, I could write an entire novel from just his perspective as a teenager.
You really could.
He was being raised by the chancellor and like simultaneously trying to make a way for his people to break out of their prison.
Right.
So like, there was a lot on his shoulders, simultaneously trying to protect his child with this human that he made. Like there was a lot on Asim's shoulders, and it was very important to me that he wasn't perfect because I don't think that's realistic for anyone.
No.
And so I wanted him to make mistakes, but I wanted his love for his daughter to triumph all of that.
Yeah, and I think you did a good job with that. And you're right. That was going to be one of my questions at the end. That I honestly can see, even though I know this, you wrote 2 iterations of this book, but there could be another book, like you just said, just talking about just the chancellor father, just kind of how it all began. It's so much, because it's so much that you could just add to it, and it just just keep building and building, and Rue becomes this phenomenal sister that she is. Does she become a queen? I mean, it's so different ways you could take the whole book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be fun to revisit it at some point.
Yeah, at some point. I mean, but what do you, from your readers, when they read this, what are 3 things you want them to take away from Ashes of Gold?
That they are worthy, of the utmost love, that they are capable of more than they think they are, and that they need to trust themselves. I think particularly for young readers, teenagers in particular, in a world right now, I think there's just so many questions and doubt. I think teens in particular struggle with insecurity more than they vocalize. They're consumed with what other people think of them. And with Instagram culture and like TikTok culture and like social media, there's this constant sort of thread of, being sort of judged and perceived by other people, and that defines who you are. Think about social bullying, right? So I'm hoping that readers who read Rue are undergirded with this sense of confidence that's unshakable, that they learn to trust themselves instead of looking outward to the world to define like who they are and what they can do.
I like that. And I think you did a great job with that, because you can see Rue really growing in her confidence through the book.
Accidentally leading.
Yes, accidentally leading.
I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. And then you're like, well, you're kind of doing
it. You're already doing it. And Julia said, well, you did it back at home. You remember the time you did it? And oh yeah, I forgot about that. It was like you said, always have to have that accountability partner. I like that she said that out of everyone that's around me that's helped me, I know I can count on Julius. He's the one person I know I can trust.
And that's reflective of home, right?
Yes.
That thread of remember where you came from, right? I have this really pretty bookmark I'll show you. It's a quote from the book, and it has a line. Actually, hold on. That's not what I meant to show you. I have these really cool character cards. So anybody who pre-orders,
oh wow,
make sure you have anybody who pre-orders the book before they read this. Make sure they send me a copy of their receipt, and they'll get this for free. This
that's awesome.
That's Julius.
Oh, I was gonna say that's Julius. I already know who that was.
That's Julius. And on the back it says, "Stay true to who you are. It won't lead you wrong."
Oh wow, that's awesome. I like that. And you have it for each one of the characters?
I have it for Julius and Jamal because there's the whole love triangle thing.
Yes.
And we're not going to say anything else about that.
No, we're not going to say that.
This one says, what is a leader but a person who fights for what they believe in? So this is my favorite quotes from the book.
Okay, cool. We definitely make sure we bring that up and make sure people do that. What did you learn? What did Jay learn from writing this book? Did you learn anything about yourself that you didn't know?
I learned everything that Rue learned. There's a vulnerability in telling a story, especially your first book, because I think it's known. I think that authors kind of put pieces of themselves in their stories. I do think the more books you write, the more you can be intentional about that. But in that first book, a lot of times, a bit more of you bleeds onto the page than you anticipate. Wings of Ebony, Rue grappled with her relationship with her absent father. And that was a huge healing process for me, exploring that. I did not know that my father's absence had affected me until I read Ebony. I did not consciously know that. If you asked me, I was like, I'm good. I mean, it is what it is, I'm good. We talk every once in a while now, all good. But it really kind of unstuck some things that had sort of mortared in me when I explored that pain and that hurt and that healing in Wings of Ebony. And then there's also the mom relationship. There are some moments between Rue and her mom that are from my own life. Just sweet memories. Because remember, I lived far away from home and I missed home. Like I left at 17 to go to college, and then from college, I moved to California for graduate school, and then my partner and I got married, and then we started going all over because of the military. So I just didn't really have a chance to come home to Houston. And so, I mean, at 17, when I left, I was like, still a child in so many ways.
Yeah,
And I got
exactly.
married and I had children and my entire 20s, and I was away. And so I was constantly reflecting on my childhood and my upbringing and the things that were poured into me, and just who I am as I'm continuing to grow into this like mother and woman. And a lot of that, I think, comes through in the book in Rue's search for her own confidence and her understanding her identity, where she comes from, understanding how she can be a part of both places. Like when she's in East Rome, when she's in Gazan, because one of the subtle metaphors in Ashes, because most of Ashes of Gold does not take place in East Rome, it takes place on
Yes.
the magical island. And I wanted to parallel this idea of like, what do you do when you are a fish out of water? So like when I left my home and went to college, I was completely away from anything familiar. I was the first in my family to go to college. Neither of my parents graduated high school. And so I was at college and I was going to this really great state university here. I had a great scholarship. And I just remember feeling like I was going to conquer the world. And I'll never forget my first grade in college was a D. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got here and I'm going to flunk out. Like, I just remember feeling awful and feeling out of control of like, I didn't know how to fix it, because I was doing everything I knew how to do. I didn't know how to study at the time. I did not know how to study, but that was part of the reason my grades were so bad. Is just, I felt like all of these tools I needed to succeed, I did not have. And it took a lot of me figuring out who I was and figuring out how my brain works to be able to pivot and succeed. And I graduated with a phenomenal GPA in a completely different degree program. And I think that a lot of that feeling of like being away from everything that's familiar and not knowing how to do something that you haven't seen someone in your family or someone who looks like you do before is very daunting. And so that was a big inspiration too behind Rue going to Gazan. I won't spoil it, but early in the book, something is thrust upon her and she's like, no.
Yes.
Like, no, because she can't wrap her head around rising to such a challenge because for many reasons, one of which is she's never seen anybody like that, like her from where she's from do that before. And that's intimidating. So that was also sort of a parallel from my own life.
Yeah. 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 And that's true. And throughout you can see that constant tug of war mentally in her mind of how to cope and deal with that, no matter. And you gradually spoon-fed it through with various characters that encourage her to become stronger and, look within. You got it. You have the power. So what was the hardest part about writing this book?
Ashes, finding the emotion was hard because I write deeply emotional stories. I'm a Cancer, so I cry very easily. Like emotion is just what I love. Like I love when a reader is so enthralled by my characters in my world, there are actual tears in their eyes. And so to do that, I have to write from an emotional place. And summer 2020, man, the world is on fire. Mm-hmm. I just had nothing. I had nothing in me. So my first draft of this book was just plot and character. Like it was just plot, actually. Like it was emotionally void. Like I'll never forget when I read it through, my friend who reads my stories before I send them to my editor, she was like, this is such a twisty story, but I have no idea how Rue is feeling. And I was like, that's because I have no feelings left. So the hard part was digging into an emotionally dry well in myself to emotionally engage in a difficult story when life was already a lot.
Yeah, so last year, yeah.
That's probably the hardest part.
Yeah, last year was hard. It was immensely hard in a lot of ways. You mentioned that you plotted. So do you literally just sit down and just structured out the plot of the book first? What was your process of kind of putting it together?
I actually I used to try to pants a novel, which is just like fly by the seat of my pants and write whatever, but that doesn't usually work for me anymore. What I do now is I start with a character and plot kind of analysis. I like to figure out why the character, in my opinion, the plot exists to serve the character. The reason the plot moves the way it moves is to change the character incrementally. So in order for me to figure out the plot, I have to first figure out, how does my character need to change? What is their misbelief about the world that needs to be overturned by the book? So I started with, what is Rue's core misbelief? What is she wrong about? And that is how I decide how the plot's going to unfold, to prove to her that the way she sees things is wrong. And then it usually comes to a cataclysmic moment around the 3/4 point, 75% of most stories, where they have to sort of reckon with, the way I've been seeing things is wrong. And then at the end of the book, it's about them living out the correct truth and proving that that what they used to believe, they've overturned that misbelief. So I very methodically plot out my stories to create that character arc. And that's how I decide. I do all of that before I start writing. And that usually is like, it starts as a few sentences per plot beat. And then I turn the plot beats into full-on chapter summaries. So I summarize each chapter. And in that summary is not just what happens, but how it changes the character, how it challenges the character, how she struggles with it. I get into the emotions of those things. And then I write each summary, stretch it out into a full chapter.
Oh, wow. Okay. So start to finish on the book, how long did it take you to write Ashes to Go?
Ashes, the first draft, I was in the middle of moving. We'd gotten out of the military. So we were literally in the middle of relocating from California to Texas. I was literally writing in the car as we were driving. It took me, I think, about 7 weeks to write the first draft. But then the first—
That's not bad.
No, Wings I wrote in 35 days, but I also rewrote Wings like 9 times because
Wow.
I was a brand new writer. I still am a very, I think, new writer. But with Ashes, I knew exactly what I needed to accomplish. So I did the plot in about 6 to 7 weeks. And then when I finished that, I went back through and pulled in all that emotion I was telling you about that was missing. That took another probably 3 weeks. And then I sent it to my editor and got her notes. And then, you revise back and forth for a few months until there's a consensus that it's ready to go.
Got it. So for you, did your publisher give you a time frame of when they wanted Ashes to come out, or were you kind of open up on?
They did. So the way it works is when and it can vary, but the way it worked for me is when I was offered a book deal and my agent accepted the book deal on my behalf and we signed the contract, it was for a 2-book deal. So it was for book 1 in this series and book 2. So in that contract, it says, you will finish book 1 around this date and you will submit the first draft of book 2 by this date. So, and I mean, those dates change and there's flexibility all the time, especially in a year like 2020. In fact, for Ashes, I think my contract said it was due August 1st. And I emailed my editor and I was like, can I do September 1st? She's like, girl, please, yes. Because it was 2020. Like, we were like, what is happening? The world is like, what?
It's upside down. Yeah.
So I turned it in 30 days after that date. But again, it's a consensus between, like, your editor has to approve those things because books have a timeline and like things have to happen by a certain time to make it to shelves on time. So
exactly. Yeah. That whole process of once it's been the final edit from cover to print. Yeah. That's a whole time frame just to make it to come out at a certain time for sure. Wow. Well, let's back up a little bit to get the seat at the table. How hard was it to even sell the idea to the publishing company for book 1? I mean, because as you kind of alluded to it earlier, just stating that a lot of times, people of color, more specifically Blacks, don't really a lot of times have a seat at the table. So here's your chance. You wrote a YA book about a Black girl from the inner city, and we're talking about magic. How easy was that to sell?
So I have to talk about Angie Thomas first to answer this question, and Nick Stone. Angie Thomas, the author of The Hate You Give, Nick Stone, the author of, they've authored many books. I'm just mentioning like one of each.
Right.
Nick Stone, the author of Dear Martin. Those books changed the landscape for inner city kids and stories. Now, those are both contemporary stories. They're not magical, but those were the first times I saw like a story with an inner city kid at the center, and Jason Reynolds too. On the map.
Yes.
Like in a major way. And so because of that, when I pitched my book to publishers, I decided to do a public contest because my Twitter community was very supportive and have been amazing to me. So I thought, well, I'm going to take part in this Twitter pitch contest. So twice a year, this organization called Div Pit, run by Beth Phelan, who's amazing, is an opportunity to sort of remove the access barriers. Publishing professionals, I'm talking about editors, senior editors, people in charge that like make book deals happen, come to Twitter between certain hours and they look at tweets about stories. And if they're interested in that story, they will retweet it. So it's a chance to skip ahead in the process and to get visibility from the people who are the deciders. You also, now you don't sell books directly to a publisher. You need an intermediary, like a basketball player needs a sport agent, a book author needs a book agent. And so you also that day have book agents, hundreds of them on Twitter, looking through things. And if they want to see pages because they think they can sell it on your behalf, they'll click the like button. So I wrote a tweet, tiny little 140 characters tweet, which pitched my story. I called it The Hate You Give, which is Angie Thomas's blockbuster bestseller, meets Wonder Woman. And then I put in a little Rue, Rue, a black teen must, I don't remember the exact wording, it's on my website. Rue, a black teen must lean into her ancestors' magic to protect her community from drugs, violence, and crime, something like that. And it went
that was powerful. That was powerful.
And the reason it went viral though, is because Angie and Nick and Jason had gone before me and proven to publishers books about characters from inner city communities do sell, because that is unfortunately how publishing views book contracts is, can I sell this? That's just, exactly. It's not altruistic for them. It is business for them. And so when I did that pitch contest, all my Twitter community were blowing up the comments. So many authors were being so supportive. But then I started getting, hundreds of likes, tons. By the end of the day, I had like 23 different publishing houses.
Wow.
All big ones and small ones saying, when you get an agent, I want to see this. So that is how it blew up. But again, if Angie Thomas, Jason Reynolds, and Nick Stone did not exist and write books, that would not have gone the same way.
Yeah, I can see that, because that was two powerful authors that you were able to mesh that together in a nice way that you could actually see that. Here these two authors meets Wonder Woman and got an inner city girl with magic. Okay, how can we make that turn into a good book? This actually, I can see Rue as a movie, to be honest with you.
Thank you. The dream.
Yeah, it was a fun book. Both books were, so it has a lot of growth, a lot of depth that could be used, and with imagination to put it on the big screen. And the key will be is can you make everything that you put in a book come to life to make it look real? That'll be probably the key to making it a great movie, because you did a lot of. How did you come up with the languages that you use, like for the spells and whatnot? Because you had a lot of spells in the book.
It's interesting. If I were to go back and do that, I would do it totally differently. I would be much more methodical, because when I was writing the book, I'm very big on just get the words out, then you can revise them later. So when I was writing something and I found that I needed a spell, I would just make up something and then I keep going and say, I'm going to come back and fix that. I never went back and fixed it.
Never did.
No. So we have this language that I just literally made up because I like the sounds. Now, I did comb through in edits and look at like the phonetics of some of the words to make sure like the long A's and the short A's were consistent. I looked at some languages like Afrikaans and some other languages that I wanted to pull inspiration from. There were certain sounds I liked, like hard G sounds and Z sounds I wanted to emphasize. But if I were to design a language again, I would do it way more methodically. But that's how I did it then, is I really focused on the sort of the linguistics of the sound, because I'm a very auditory reader. I like to read out loud. I like to, honestly, when I finish reading my book, I like to read it out loud and like act out all the voices, because it brings it alive to me in a different way. And so I'm always thinking visually and screen and TV adaptation. That's just how my brain works when I'm creating stories. And so that influenced like my development of the language. It was very sort of, how does this sound? Do I like the cadence of the sentence, the cadence of the words? And that's how I picked it. I do not recommend doing that. I recommend just, if you're going to design a language, starting with the phonetics and building the language, because what I did was just not ideal.
So are you plan on doing an Audible audiobook?
So audiobook is in my publisher's hands. They did an audiobook for Wings. I don't know if they're doing one for Ashes or not. Hopefully, but I don't know. There is one for Wings of Ebony, though.
Did you do the reading for the first one?
No, Bonnie Turpin did the reading for the first one. Bonnie is the audio book narrator for Children of Blood and Bone. She's done a lot of really huge, successful, award-winning and best-selling books. So I was truly honored that she was willing to do my story as well. And she said she really liked it when she finished it, which was great.
Yeah, it really is. It really is a good book. It's, even though I know it's fantasy, it was still realistic.
Mm-hmm. I like to write grounded fantasy, accessible fantasy, because for me, reading fantasy as a kid growing up, I felt a bit ostracized from some of the worlds that I would see, because the experiences that I had were not relatable to the kids in the stories. And so my brain did not know how to reconcile those two things. So my approach to fantasy is a lot more accessible. I want contemporary readers and fantasy readers to love my work. So I try to straddle that line. I want contemporary readers to realize they can read fantasy. And I want fantasy readers to be enthralled by these new and cool magic systems and diverse character casts that I'm bringing to them.
Okay, you did it. I mean, it was a great job of doing just that. Who inspires you to write? Are there any authors that pique your interest?
Oh gosh, the list is long and exhaustive. To name a few, one of my, I have inspirations for different things. Like in terms of like an author in this industry who holistically, not only her work, but herself as an author, as a Black woman, as a mother, as a working mother. Nick Stone is someone who I absolutely love. Yeah. She was like she's like I always say big sister, and she always elbows me for that, because we were literally born days apart, same year. Our sons were born the same day. Like we're so. Oh,
wow. But I call her similarities.
I call her the older twin. I say she came out first, but no, Nick, who is single-handedly held me up through my publishing process and just continues to be a beacon in this journey and just a font of encouragement. Another two authors who I really admire, not only who they are, but their craft of magical world building, are Sabaa Tahir, who wrote an Ember in the Ashes series, and which is a book about I believe it's about a Pakistani American girl. I'm gonna verify that because I would hate to be wrong. And then Leigh Bardugo, who's she's a white author. And like I said, I struggled to connect to white fantasy for a very long time because I just felt like it didn't speak to me. Yeah, Pakistani American. But Leigh is where that doesn't apply. Leigh's stories, I'm enthralled by her ability to world build. Like when I start reading by like sentence 3, I'm transported to another place. So as a fantasy writer, as I learn to create worlds, I'm constantly studying her work and seeing, what is it about the way she tells the story that makes me literally feel like I've left my body and I'm in this story. So Bardugo, Sabaa, Nick. Another one is Danielle Clayton, who is the founder of We Need Diverse Books and the author of The Bells and a bunch of other really amazing books. She also has a middle grade magic school book coming out called The Marvelers in May. And her ability to create diverse worlds that are inclusive and representative and just like rich with like history and heritage is mind-blowing. So these are all people whose craft I study. And then I love literary work. So two of my favorite literary authors would be Jacqueline Woodson and Toni Morrison, of course.
Wow, two phenomenal writers for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Before we get out of here, it's a new year. You have any New Year resolutions?
I have a love-hate relationship with New Year resolutions.
Me too. I do too.
Story. In 2022, I'm rejecting this idea that I need to come up with a new way to reinvent myself. In 2022, I'm just focused on being authentically myself in a way that I never have before. So what that looks like in 2022 is I'm determined to put work in its proper place. So work is, I think so much of like pursuing the American dream and like the way things are structured in this country is you put so much of your time and energy into the pursuit of things and you spend all of your time working these long hours on a job, obviously making ends meet, but then it's all in the pursuit a lot of times of like wealth and things. And so I think sometimes, because I am a very ambitious person, that becomes my focus. The work becomes my focus instead of like actually being present and like living every day. So next year and there forward, my goal is to be more present and to put work in its proper place, which is something I do, but not all that I am.
Okay. So if I ask you favorite guilty pleasure, what would that be?
Reality TV. Real Housewives of Atlanta, Real Housewives of Potomac, specifically. I think so. I used to be a Real Housewives of Atlanta stan, but I think Potomac is my favorite now. I think. Okay. Yeah,
Right. What do you like more? What draws you into Potomac?
Oh gosh, I love them both, but I never even thought about this question. What draws me into Potomac? First of all, who's my favorite character? I don't know. I guess I love the dynamic of the women they've picked. I love that there's all of these really interesting personalities, and a couple of the characters in the show they're people, not characters. People on the show remind me of people that I know in real life. And so it's really fun to look at the dynamics. I love really deep stories. And I think that there's something really enthralling about the vulnerability that Giselle Bryant brings to the screen. And I want to see like the digging that her daughters do when she's around her daughters. I want to see more of that. Like I want to see more of Giselle sort of come out of her shell. I'm enthralled by Candace and her mother's relationship and the way that those seeds have kind of led into who Candace is and who Candace is fighting to become. There's so much in her that I can just see so much of her that I want more. I want more of all of their stories. And then I love the Grand Dame. I love
Yes.
I just love how unapologetically true she is. And I love how her and Giselle spar back and forth. And then Robin, gosh, if I could relate to anybody on the show, it'd probably be Robin, because Robin is like super laid back and chill most of the time. She's just like, look, I'm not about to get worked up about anything. And that's totally me. I'm just like, whatever. I'm just not going to get in a fuss about it. And I love that because I feel like I see a lot of shows where everyone is sort of a diva, and Robin to me is like this kind of like calm amid the storm. Most of the time, not always. She's just really like unbothered. And I feel like that energy is so relatable.
Yeah, okay.
I love it.
A great book has what?
A great book has a lingering impact on the reader.
That's good. Yeah, I could think that's a good answer because I could think of several books that has a lingering impact on. Yeah.
They stay with you, you know?
Yeah, they stay with you. Yeah.
In different ways.
Yeah. That is a good definition. Before we pull out, is there anything you'd like to read a passage from the book or just a little bit an excerpt from it before we get out?
I can. I'd love to. Let me grab that copy.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is the book. This is a great book to pick up. Ashes of Gold by Elle. And I strongly recommend you to also pick up Wings of Ebony. That is the first book by Elle. They're both available at blackbookstore.com.
Is there any particular place you want me to pull from?
No, wherever your heart leads you, because there's so much throughout the book. I'm kind of thinking now, what stuck out to me a good part.
There's that part where Julius and Rue are sitting outside on watch. There's also the part where
that was a good one. That was that's a good scene because I think that's where he kind of talked about her past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can do that one. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we are both grossly overestimating my familiarity with where my words are.
No, I say I can.
Let me see.
That is hold on, I can tell you. Because matter of fact, where's my?
I'm on.
I had actually marked it. I want to say that was it wasn't 25.
It's past 27. Oh, okay, not that far.
Oh, terrible me. I should have.
Were you surprised by the twist at the end?
Yes, really, couple of surprises. Really, I guess that would have been from starting with chapter 29. So really, from 25 on was when that's when you started throwing these twists and curves. Like, okay, yeah. And I'm in my mind, I'm trying to. It's okay. No, it's not that person. It's this person. I'm literally saying this. I said, I didn't see that one coming.
Who is it? Who is it? Okay, let me see. So it's after they get caught in that one trap.
Yes.
Okay, I found it. In chapter 23.
Oh, it's 23. I'm way too far. I'm still down at 25. Yeah, chapter 23.
Okay. Okay. So to set the scene, they just got Rue is leading a group of people, trying to lead them safely through this city, which has basically been like burned down. And they just got caught by this magical trap, got away by the skin of their teeth. And they found a place to hide underground. And so Rue and Julius are on watch while everybody's resting. Okay. So this will have some mild spoilers as a side note. Okay. Okay. Julius catches my eye, checking his watch, tapping his foot. I move toward him. Bree's reason for not telling me doesn't satisfy, but I let it go for now. You good? He asks. Let's just go up. Julius and I ascend the stairs. He pushes open the door a crack and peeks first, then gives me a thumbs up. We step out, and the door is silent as it eases closed. The edge of the central district is much more rural than the city center. The concrete landscape is a collage of tall buildings with chunks missing and others toppled over. The secluded spot where we found underground access is behind a row of abandoned warehouses. Faint smells of something metallic or soapy hang in the air, and Jude sets a blanket down. We settle on the ground, pressing ourselves back to back to keep watch in opposite directions. Anything in particular to look for, he says, and I can feel his heart thrumming against my back. Any people, sounds, lights in the sky even. Got it. This place is wild. Y'all got shit more lethal than guns flying from your fingertips. Well, it should only be flying from our fingertips. They're thieves. He pulls the round of onyx from his pocket I left with him forever ago. It's wild that all that magic can be stored in this tiny little rock. He tosses it in the air, catching it. You figure out how you're going to get it away from the graves? Sort of. I explained how the general's onyx popped out when I fired my magic directly at it. But for that to happen, it can't just be me. There are thousands of graves. We need an army to take them on. Which is why the first thing is getting their magic back. Yep. It's going to be all right, Rue. I fidget in the silence. He doesn't know that. He wants it to be true. And I appreciate the sentiment, but he doesn't know it for fact. You bugging? His tone is gentle. Talk to me. What are you worried about? That I can't trust Bree now? That I don't know who I can trust? But that's all bobbing on the surface of the real root of it. I see my father's open-eyed stare. That someone else will die because of me, I say, my insecurity breaking through, cracking me like an egg. What if I'd figured out my magic sooner, got to the row sooner? You know how many people would be alive if I hadn't been so stubborn before? You know how many people are alive because you were? If you'd given up, Rue, shit. But nah, you're too stubborn for that. He shifts the way he's sitting, and we're less back to back now. I can make out his profile in the moonlight. Who you trust most? You, of course, Negro. You shouldn't. He faces me fully and grips my shoulders. I told you, you should trust yourself first and foremost. He grins. And me second. But how do I trust myself with something like this when I've never seen no shit like this before? Do they want me to lead them? Like lead, be their queen. My last name isn't Clinton. I don't have some fancy Ivy League degree. I'm not well studied. I'm not some well studied expert on Alexander the Great or Sun Tzu's Art of War. I know none of that shit. I'm just me. I sigh. Yet somehow I got a whole damn army of Makazi following me, basically looking to me for safety. And I'm making critical missteps, Jew. More people relying on me isn't what I wanted. This wasn't the plan. The plan is to get the ancestors to fix this. For something of this magnitude, they're the fixers, not me. I rest my head on the wall and study the specks in the sky, jealous of how they hang there with one job, to shine. When you was working that summer job at the Y, remember? Yeah. That boss lady told you the number of kids that could attend was like 20 or something, right? Yeah, which is so dumb because the Y is the best place in our neighborhood with stuff for kids to do when they're out of school. There are hundreds of kids that want it up in there. 20? Yeah, right. So you went door to door in the neighborhood. I laugh because I know where this is going. We needed more volunteers or paid staff to accommodate more kids. I wasn't just going to let them be stuck. If they needed a place to go in lieu of school, I was going to make sure they had one. I ended up with 73 signatures and a hefty donation from a church in the neighborhood. By midsummer, we had classes for 200 something kids from East Row. They kept the program going through the year after school too. Them kids ain't no different from these people here. You see a need and you fill it. That's just who you are. Even if it takes sore feet, sleepless nights, you damn near missed your SAT test for that grassroots campaigning you had going. Correction, I did miss. I had to reschedule it. You know them waivers ain't guaranteed. Moms was not happy about that, but the kids, it was worth it. Rue, that's why it's hundreds of people down there riding with you, because that heart you got, he touches my chest, shines through. A bright star catches my eye. It stands out so radiantly, I hardly notice the jagged building tops and biting chill in the air. You always know what to say. Thanks for coming through, for real.
That was great.
Thank you.
That was great. That was a good part to read. That was an excerpt from the latest book that you can actually now pick up at blackbookstore.com, Ashes of Gold by Elle. I want to thank you, Jay, for taking time to talk to us a little bit about your book and about writing. Before we leave, can you give everyone your social media handles, how to follow you and get in contact with you?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This is so much fun. I'm on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at author AUTHOR JL, and that's spelled JELLE.
Outstanding. Jay, continue to be creative, continue writing. I expect to see more great works from you in the future, but we're going to bask in the glory of this right now. Ashes of Gold from Elle. Make it a great day. Thanks for talking with us today.